Julie, I think we might have a quorum here, and let's get started. I see Elizabeth has joined, so that's good news.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, yeah, sorry, my screen was stuck and I had to drop out and come back in, but I think we're all squared away. So I'm here, I'm ready. I'm really excited for this room. Glad everyone can join us. Thanks so much. We have a really awesome panel today for this discussion. Just some notes to get us started. You'll notice there's been some updates. Thank you, Sophie, for filling me in on those with Clubhouse. You'll see at the bottom, instead of the little plus sign to ping folks into the room, you've got the little arrows chasing each other. You can share the room that way. It gives you the option to share the whole room on Clubhouse, which I think will likely notify everybody that follows you. You can invite specific people still and ping folks into the room at the bottom there. You can share the room on other social medias and copy the link as well if you'd like to email it directly or text it to somebody. So those are great new features. There's also a little chat option. I will see about enabling that and do my best to follow along and catch everyone's comments and questions if there's any in there. So that's a fun new feature. Be sure to follow me, all our moderators and panelists here today. Check out others in the room as well. It's always fun to kind of see who's who in the room and make some connections. So additionally, to support those using closed caption, we do generally state our name when we're speaking and saying your name and I'm done speaking at the end. Clubhouse does offer the closed captions at the bottom of the screen as well now. We do encourage our audience to participate. So if you find yourself inspired, please feel free to raise your digital hand. We'll do our very best to get to everyone. Please note our club is called Consuli Conversations, and in addition to this room, we host a Data Dignity Dealing You into the Data Economy and a Long COVID Patients Meet Researchers room. You can learn more by following our club. Just tap the little greenhouse at the top. All our upcoming rooms will be in our profile there. For any direct questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, if you would like to join our panel again in the future or have someone to recommend, you can send me an email. You'll find that in my bio. You can back channel me here as well if you prefer. Give us a follow on our social medias. We are at Consuli_Inc. You can learn more about us that way as well. So for those that don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth $20,000 per year. So we help people choose who gets access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, get them paid for their data and make medicine better. We do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent. Our members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There's no cost to join our movement, and you can learn more at consuli.net. That's consuli.net. I will add that link to the top of our room as well. And it's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to our room co-facilitators, Michael Young and Sophie, who will be introducing themselves and our expert guests. Michael, now over to you. It's Julie, and I'm done speaking.
Julie, thanks so much. Appreciate the rundown there. There are, obviously with Clubhouse, there are some ground rules and some housekeeping stuff that we need to do. But as you can see, Clubhouse itself is evolving and and adding additional features. Hopefully all of you are able to keep up with that. I want to send out a really warm welcome to all of our clinical trialists and interested parties here for the Clinical Trial Clubhouse, which includes pharmaceutical industry executives, easy for me to say, and patients interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. We are very fortunate to work with Consuli, which is an innovative team who are enabling data and AI for good. And in this case, obviously, we're paying attention to what's going on in healthcare and clinical trials. I wanted to just note real quickly that, amongst our typical panelists and co-mods here, we've got a couple people that are missing today. A shout out to Talia Height, my trustee, one of my trustee co-mods here, who unfortunately has come down with a diagnosed case of COVID. So the epidemic is still an an issue for many, and our thoughts go out to her. Also, Jackie Blem um, uh, had originally decided to join this group today, but unfortunately she's also down and not feeling well. Um, so we send well wishes to her, but she's been kind enough to send along a number of really pithy comments. So we'll try to weave those into the conversation as well. To the rest of the panelists here, thank you so much for joining today. And we're going to get started here with an understanding of what that one burning question is. This looks like it's going to be, as they say, a barn burner here, because we've gotten a tremendous amount of early up commentary about this. So I'd love to have Sophie Johannan, just a superb co-moderator for me with a couple other clubhouses that we do. I'd love to have her come on board now and take us into the content.
Thanks,
this is Michael,
Michael.
and I'm done speaking. I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Thanks so much. That's so kind. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm gonna make sure. All right. That was always part of our initial banter, right? To make sure that you can hear me. And Julie, I really appreciate the way you opened up the room and did the housekeeping. There have been a couple of changes on the app, and I've attended several rooms already where no one announced the changes and no one, provided that guidance that you did. So that was great. I hope everyone was able to hear Julie. So we are going to proceed with this room in PTR order. That means pull to refresh. So if you drag down your screen with your finger, it should refresh the order of speakers on the stage here. And you should see from left to right and top to down the order of speakers that will be providing their input today. So first, I would love to start with introductions. So I'll go first, and then we'll start with Justin Gundelach, and we will proceed left to right and top to down. So I'm Sophie Johannan. I'm a clinical evaluation scientist at Boston Scientific. I have 19 years experience in clinical research in various different roles, from CRA to CRC to manager to data analyst to regulatory, contracts management, peer-to-peer review, all kinds of things. And I do have a background in medicine as well. And I'm also a teacher. I'm an instructor for a company called Clinical Research Fast Track. I teach a once a month 9-hour class for new clinical research professionals. This industry is growing at a fantastic rate, and every single one burning question is relevant today to what we're dealing with all the massive changes that are happening in this industry today. So I'm super excited to hear from all of our panelists today about our one burning question. So let's introduce all of them one by one. Let's start with Justin. I'm Sophie.
All right. Thanks, Sophie. I'm Justin Gundelach. I am a program manager at the Mayo Clinic, currently working in starting up our external research consulting service line, but just previously was working in a role where one of my responsibilities was project manager for a small portfolio of clinical and data trials. I've been working in biomedical research for about 18 years, and very excited for this conversation today. I'm Justin. I'm complete.
Thanks, Justin. This is Michael Young, and I am one of the co-mods for this particular clubhouse room. But my day job also includes running a C-suite consultancy that operates at the intersection of clinical strategy and commercialization. So we are a small team that addresses a number of both positional as well as real-world strategy issues mostly for C-suite clients working in emerging and mid-stage biotech companies. It's my pleasure to help host this along with the rest of the team here, and I will pass this along now to Sandra. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Michael, for that warm transfer over to me. I am Sandra L. Washington. I am a board certified patient advocate as well as a first time author with a second book to be released this year. I believe in introducing, not only just introducing, but I believe in making sure that the patient's voice is heard when it comes to things that actually impact the patient. So I am also a board certified patient advocate. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandra. We'll proceed with Christine and then.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Christine von Reesfeld, CEO, founder of People with Empathy. My full-time day job is being a patient trying to figure out and navigate this system. And in my spare time, I like to publicly speak and really just give my opinions on what's happening and try to propose better solutions for all of us as we move forward so that no one else has to go through what Sandra and I go through. So I'm Christine, and that's my perspective. And I think Matt was next. Matt?
Yeah, I'm Matt Yusefzadeh, and I work on developing tools and therapeutics for preclinical and clinical trials of aging and age-related diseases. And I'm complete.
Greetings, everyone. This is Leona Carter. I am the founder of Clinical Data Geeks. I work here in Silicon Valley. I advise startups mostly during the day in understanding the quality of their data. My background is in public health epidemiology, but I've been managing clinical data from an academia standpoint, extern at the CDC for a little bit, went back to academia, and then I've worked in different biotech pharmaceutical companies in managing their clinical trials and building and curating the systems and the standards and processes related to the verification, maintenance, and quality of that data. This is Leona, and I'm done speaking.
Thanks so much, Leona. This is Edie. I'm Edie Edens, and I am actually a convert into becoming a research compliance attorney, although I started my journey in international human rights law, which very much colors my thought and why I have such a deep interest in areas like research ethics. Like I said, I'm a licensed attorney. I also have a background in international research ethics, and having worked with the United Nations before I came to this area, really brought a different perspective in terms of our enterprise-wide risk management mechanisms like IRBs and ethics committees, our regulatory agencies like FDA, for example, and the different ways we do research. So I spent the first 10 years of my career inside a large academic medical center before leaving for my role at First Class Solutions, the consulting firm that I have the unique privilege of contracting with. It is not my firm. I did not start it. I want to give my bosses credit, as well as also teaching life sciences and from a compliance perspective and shepherding the next generation of attorneys into this space. And so from that perspective, I really bring a unique take on the ethics and compliance, not just what we're allowed to do or what we think we're allowed to do, but what is it that we can actually truly do better to bring bench to bedside in terms of innovation and research, and do it in a way that is very patient focused and really reveals the best in ethics that we can offer for our patients and is as transparent as possible. So thank you. I'm Edie, and I am complete. I believe next will be Sheree.
Yes, ma'am. That is awesome, Edie. Thank you so very much for that introduction. We need you. My name is Sheree Reed. I am the patient care strategist. I help healthcare organizations and students alike with methods and technology that practice quality patient care that is unmatched from alternative strategies, courses, or approaches. I have a background in radiology, now specifically magnetic resonance imaging. And with that, I'll yield the mic to Ben.
Hi, everyone. It's great to meet all of you. My name is Ben. I'm a patent attorney based in Silicon Valley. I'm interested in issues relating to technology, invention, and the law, especially relating to data and artificial intelligence. For the past a few years, I'm seeing a trend of leveraging the participation of patients, contributing to very interesting personal data, and working with technology companies to come up with useful and practical devices, approaches to really leverage the data as well as our technology, try to bring really practical and critical products to the patient community. And there's a lot of interesting and complex legal issues, such as compliance, patient rights, as well as the balancing of data and AI. So I think that it's a great opportunity to be able to be here, learn from everybody, and contribute what I have. Thank you. I'm done speaking.
Good afternoon. Well, good morning on the West Coast, everyone. Here on the East Coast, good afternoon. My name is Jaleesa King, and I am a senior data analyst at Greenfire. Greenfire is we're a payment technology company, so we make payments, right? So this burning question is right up our alley. We have a suite of tools that help with patient convenience and helping our sponsors and our clients pretty much, be able to initiate payments and try to alleviate that financial and logistical burden from the patients. So this is a topic that I am super excited to talk about, and I'll hand it over. My name is Jaleesa, and I'm complete.
Thank you, Jaleesa. My name is Taya Romero. I am in client relations. I have started a group called Leaders in Clinical Research, and currently my side projects are working for neurodiversity advocacy, focusing on employee resource groups within various organizations and clinical research. I'm also helping drive the effort of Unite for Ukraine. So if you're interested in any of those, give me a follow on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Alminia Garvey. I'm Senior Director in Oncology Research. I've been working in clinical research for over 20 years. I'll just say over 20 years. But most of that time has been focused on diversity in clinical trials. And it's running the gamut from patients, but also employees in clinical trials. So I also sit on the board of a non-for-profit that helps mentor women in STEM careers. And in the last 5 years, I transitioned from working in Chicago to working in France. So really, really focused now on diversity here in Europe. And I'm super, super excited because I'm on vacation in Ireland, and I just saw that on the Irish Censor this year, they're actually going to include African descent and also Roma community. So this is super exciting to be able to sort of begin tracking some of this information. And so as you can imagine, this topic is extremely important to me because always wondering about where's that line between, giving patients what they need to participate in the study and coercion. So really interested to talk about this evening, and thank you for having me. I'm Alminia. I'm done speaking.
Wow, Almenia, great segue into the introduction of our one burning question. Thank you so much, all of our panelists, for your beautiful introductions. As you can see, we have a really diverse panel here from all different corners of clinical research. And so we're very excited to start today. Our one burning question today: most patients and researchers agree that clinical trial enrollees or participants, particularly those in real-world evidence and complex individual data collection trials, should be compensated, not just reimbursed, but compensated for trial participation. So, how can trial participants be fairly compensated so that broader, more diverse populations enroll while creating real equity, particularly around the use of personal data? And what is fair compensation? So that's what we're getting at here. I will immediately throw a wrench into this question and make you guys think a little bit, and then we'll go back to Justin for his take on it. But I want you to think about compensation for a clinical trial participant, whether it's a randomized controlled trial, IND, IDE, or a registry or a real world trial. What levels of compensation are fair for those types of participants? And also, I want you to think about bias, because that's the other side, right? We want to provide fair compensation while maybe we can't eliminate bias, but we want to prevent as much bias as we can. So we don't want to cause coercion also with clinical trial compensation. So with that in mind, I want to immediately pass the mic to Justin, and we'll go in PTR order and get everyone's opinion to start. Go, Justin.
Thanks, Sophie. And I'm glad you brought up, and I think at least Elminia did as well in her introduction, the concept of coercion, because when I read the question for today, that definitely wasn't reflected in there. And I'll definitely say from, my perspective as someone that's worked at a AMC, a single AMC his whole career, the dogma that's always drilled into us as we're, being taught how to write research protocols and design these things is, that it's remuneration, not payment, and that we are seeking to compensate the participant in a trial or a study for their time and effort that it takes to participate, but we're not paying them in a way that they are doing this as a source of income. And I don't have the answer to that. I'm really curious to hear other perspectives today. That's why I was really excited for this conversation. But my perspective, it was really interesting. Over the last 2 years, I worked on a NIH-funded consortium with 10 AMCs around the country, and we were trying to work together on this harmonized protocol for a study that patients would have to be involved with, over the course of a year plus. And having people from all 10 sites kind of come with their own perspective of what is an appropriate amount of compensation, as well as the details of how do we pay it out, is it one lump sum, do you pay people for each survey they take throughout the study, et cetera. And everybody came with a different perspective as to here's what we typically do for a trial this size. And everybody came with a different perspective of my specific institution has very specific rules about how I can pay this out. It can be gift cards, it has to be gift cards, it can't be gift cards, it can, all those sorts of details. But interestingly, people from 10 different, like these are the biggest name academic medical centers across the US that you can think of for the most part. Not a single one had a policy, much less guidance institutionally, as far as this is what the appropriate amount should be. And I just found that, everybody's kind of shooting in the dark. We have these kind of guiding principles of it should be compensating them for their time and effort, but not, in a manner that's coercive. But what does that mean? Nobody really knows. I'm really eager today to hear perspectives from people that work in other places or other parts of our industry to see, are you receiving, clearer guidance on those sorts of things, and what are the kind of guiding principles that you think should be important in making these decisions. I'm Justin, and I'm going to pass the mic to Christine.
I think it was actually Sandra next, but
sorry, I just sorry, yeah, Sandra.
It's okay, Justin. Go ahead,
Sandra.
Sandra.
Sandra, this is Michael, and before you get started there, let me just interject something here, because Justin, you absolutely have hit the nail on the head that there's been a considerable amount of, if you will, consideration for the fact that patients who do enroll in clinical trials are actually sharing and allowing the use of personal data, which there have been recent analyses to suggest that data is worth $20,000 on a per annum basis. While recognizing the issues of coercion, everybody, I think, is as evidenced by what you were just talking about, everybody is recognizing that there is an inequity here, and now it's really an issue of trying to figure out how do we fairly compensate? How do we make this so that it is non-coercive, but yet recognizes and acknowledges the value of that data that is given? And I'll just take a second here to share something that Jackie Blem had sent in her absence. I'll read this to you. She was talking about what determines whether or not the participant is compensated. And usually the clinical site, as the sponsor, their group leaves this section blank on the informed consents and lets sites fill in the compensation information. So the sites end up having two considerations. They may have an institutional policy that doesn't allow for compensation, which is usually the case in oncology trials. But the other consideration is the IRB, and unfortunately, I was trying to get some folks in here from a couple of the IRBs, but I know Edie will help fill this in. But sites know that the institutional review boards and the ethics committees are going to look at this kind of compensation very, very closely. So I don't think there's an issue with thinking that patients shouldn't be compensated, but the question is, how can we make this happen without biasing things? So this is Michael, and I'm going to turn that over now to Sandra. Go ahead.
And thank you so much, Michael, for that. And I was going to actually say before I started that you were actually next to go. So thank you so much. And thank you for sharing that information from both yourself and Jackie. And what I would like to raise is that there is indeed an issue when we have clinical trials that are going on where nobody knows, what the patient should get paid for participating. Should they be paid? Yes, they should. Should it be equal across all corners? Yes, it should. Who makes up that decision? Well, start taking a look at what's going on in each geographical location throughout the country and what they're paying, and then come up with a screening or a survey where you can actually do a best practices, okay? Because someone living in New York should not, their body is just as equal to someone living in California, right? So you can't say, okay, well, we can pay this part of the country or disperse this amount for these clinical trial participants when these other ones shouldn't. No, that's not going to actually amount to much. What's going to happen is what has happened when it comes down to health inequalities and health disparities is that there's going to be a sense, if it's not already there, there's going to be a sense of discrimination against patients because of where they live, what they look like, whatever reason that you can come up with. So something has to be done, and something should be done soon, that gets it in line where everyone is being looked at as equal and no one is being left out because of any other condition. So this is Sandra, and I'm complete for now. Christine, it's on to you.
Thank you. This is Christine, and you guys know I have a million thoughts on this. But first, I want to say I don't think we should be looking at paying the time and effort and really, we're in a Consuli room, we're talking about data. We all know the value of data. And I think if we're looking at COVID and what's happened, and California was in a $48 billion increase, their budget, we had an excess budget of that much money, and that's data. And so what I think, I've talked to economists at Stanford and people who work in genetics, and they say, again, if Alice Rafton was here, it's more about, we think, patients taking agency over that data and being able to negotiate on their own. One of the big things that I think we fail to think about is we pay healthy people to participate in clinical trials. But once you get sick, you no longer have an option for anything. And at that point, when you're sick, you're probably financially strapped as well. And I think as we're looking at this, all of these people who are participating in trials, whether they are healthy or sick, are giving data that's also being sold, that's being used to develop other products and therapies. And I think it shouldn't be looking at the time and effort, but more so how valuable is that data, and then pay those patients a percentage of what their data is worth. But anyways, I could go on, but I'm not going to take up the whole hour. So Matt, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, so we've recently gone through this because we're doing a study with one of the big five pharma, and they have their own of regulations and philosophies for compensation as well. But like Justin said, it's kind of the wild, wild west to some degree. I mean, we sort of looked at, for ideas centered around compensation, the World Health Organization, and there's this other organization called the Council for International Organizations of Medical Science. And there's kind of different compensation models, whether it was, I think there's four of them. There's the market model, a wage model, a reimbursement model, and an appreciation model. And, having to figure out which one would fit best and what also would work with the payer as well. So it's kind of you have to have a merging of the different value systems to really figure it out.
Hey, Matt, what was
Um,
that site again, or what was that organization's name? I missed
so
it.
I'll give you the acronym: CIOMS, Council for International Organizations of Medical Science, and the other one being the WHO. So I think if you're really going to do a paradigm shift on the value of patient participation in clinical trials, you've probably got to affect those organizations first, because that's where a lot of people draw their inspiration from. And I'm complete.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Christine. Wow, already so many good perspectives, and I'm trying to kind of synthesize from here. So we're talking about compensating patients for not only their time, but for the value of the data that is provided from their participation, that comes from the participation of their in the trial, right? And then we have this concern about coercion, not because their data is not worth that amount of money. It certainly is. But how much, at what point are we influencing patients because you're going to get, Michael brought up the potential amount of 20K for a full data set. If a patient is promised $20,000 to participate in the trial, will the patient then participate and consent to the trial just for that $20,000? So how do we prevent that? How do we provide the $20,000 for the data without affecting their decision to participate? I think that's where the crossroads are. And I wonder if one of the solutions is to parse out that payment over the life of the trial. So the more the participation, the more the data the patient gets, that, I mean, over a 3-year or 5-year period for a typical randomized controlled trial or post-market trial, 20,000 is really not a salary, right? So, like we said, we don't want to provide a separate salary just for this to coerce patients into participating, but at the same time, we want to compensate them not only for their time and their effort, but also for the value of the data they're providing by their participation. So with that, I want to pass it on to Lyona, who is next in my PTR order
Hey,
on my screen.
hey, Sophie, sorry for the interruption again. It's
Yep.
Michael. Just want to make sure for the group that we are clear about, I don't want to conflate, I'd be the last one to conflate things around math, but I just wanted to make clear that the data that I shared was an estimate of the value of personal data, including healthcare data, per person per year. So, I mean, I think it's fine for the conversation's sake to say $20,000, but I just wanted to make sure we knew where that number was coming from. This is
Thank you,
Michael,
Mike.
and I'm complete.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. All right, Leona, what do you think?
Hi, Sophie. Hello, everyone. This is Lyona. Okay, so when I hear salary coercion, I see it a bit different, because think of it in terms, so I'm in the music industry as well. I kind of split my time between metaverses, music, entertainment, as well as biotech. It's an interesting space, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned there in relationship to royalties. So when I think of the value of your clinical data, I see it as something irrespective of the amount. I think it more ties to value. Someone mentioned policies. Modalities. So models rather. I think that different models should be investigated so that equity is at the forefront. And I think another person mentioned the ability to negotiate. I see it as a mixed, a very multifaceted approach. But I think when I hear salary, I don't see it as X amount per year, and that is, or you can liken that or see or see that as coercion. I see it as a benefit, and of a well-informed participant in a study can then make the decision, that that X amount is sufficient for me to participate or not. I think it is powerful to know the value, to have some sort of conversation about that, but also that, like someone else mentioned, so that it's equitable regardless of where you live and how you look. I know when I look at clinical trial data, I don't have enough information to judge someone. I can see the value of their data. Like I might be looking at a particular biomarker because that's what the team that's focusing on that condition needs to know. And I might know that biomarker is been very popular within this patient profile for X number of years. So I know from where I sit in from a data perspective that there's a certain profile. So I see it's more like a regional, so I have a high level population view versus an individual view. It doesn't necessarily mean that the individual shouldn't be compensated. It certainly does mean that, but I also see it for the long haul in terms of perpetuity. So I know we've talked about, and Michael, you came in and said, yes, that's an estimate annually. I see it in perpetuity as well. So I find I'm in my head. So as you guys are speaking, just bear in mind that I'm in my head and I'm toying with the idea of salary as coercion, because I actually don't see it as that. I see it as empowerment.
Michael, can I interject really quick? Because Leona, I speak all the time and
Sure.
say my data is my song. And if you want to play my
You're always so
music,
polite, Christine, but go for it.
but I just want to say, Leona, I always tell people my data is my song. And if you want to play my music, you have to pay me. So I love that you brought in the music industry, because I think this is something that most people don't think about because it's not tangible. And we can relate so well to the music industry in paying people for data as in relation to their song. But thank you, Leona. And thanks, Michael, for letting me interfere. Edie, I think it's your turn.
Thank you so much. So I talk about sitting on your hands. This is, most of you know, my very first job, excuse me, was an IRB consultant before I actually knew what IRB stood for. And this is where I spent the beginning of my career before I came to the dark side, which I actually like even a little bit more than I do IRB world. But suffice to say, I have worked in some of the largest institutionalized and academic medical center IRB settings from the inside, being that poor little person who's running those meetings, writing those minutes, reviewing each and every trial that comes across your path. And of course, in order to do that, you have to have a really deep understanding of the regulations, because the IRB isn't only looking at biomedical research, it's also looking at social behavioral research. I was at an institution that actually had a very robust liberal arts program, if you can believe. There is a lot of research to be done in folklore, mythology, ebonics at the time, and a few other spaces, also including music, that, because those are not areas that are typically where we think of when we think of clinical trials, it was actually even harder for them to understand some of our regulatory infrastructure because it was so far from their mind that they were actually doing research. And I say all this to say, it's really important, both from that particular experience, having been the ops and the person who is putting those studies before the board and guiding the board on what regulatory decisions have to be made, to understand from the inside looking out how these decisions are actually made on compensation. And if anyone here is unfamiliar, this is kind of why, I wanted to chime in, and then I'll give you a very short synopsis of my personal opinion. So here's the thing. When you look at regulations, whether you're looking at the common rule that is over our IRBs in the United States, EMA regulations for European ethics committees, any type of regulatory infrastructure, whether it's FDA, right, you will see that the emphasis is not on a particular dollar amount. An algorithm or a rubric is not in any way specified or provided, nor do you want it to be. Hold on, I'll get to that. Because what we're most concerned about is righting history's wrongs. And when we look back at some of our more notable, if you will, situations in clinical research where, in fact, consent had, quote unquote, been established. So I'm not talking about, for example, Nuremberg or the Nazi medical trials where they had absolutely no say in whether or not they were experimented on. I'm talking about where, in fact, and many of you may not know this, if you are familiar with what is often called Tuskegee, the actual name of the trial is untreated syphilis in the Negro male. That's the actual name of that trial. It was very targeted, but those individuals were technically consented. And if you go on the good old Google, you can find what that consent looked like. They weren't paid a dime, but they were coerced, 100% coerced by that consent. And so the notion of compensation, as we now see it many moons later, is truly these regulations trying to bulletproof ethics committees, FDA, et cetera, all the regulatory agencies from ever going down this road again. Because establishing the concept of consent wasn't enough. It didn't stop the coercion because of the way we didn't regulate how it was written or what was promised to the subject, to the human, to the participant in return for their participation. So what IRBs have to do is take this very broad regulation, and like I said, as a lawyer, I'm telling you, you want it to be broad because this is a regulation that's going to be promulgated against and across so many different areas of research. If we set a specific algorithm or rubric, it's going to screw somebody, right? Because it won't have been made for them. And so this is why you see regulations that are open to interpretation and open to flexibility. And it's those ethics committees and those boards like IRBs in the United States that are actually then looking at the risk, more importantly, the burden to the participants, and guiding those conversations on compensation. Now, I will tell you, sponsors have their own unique rubric. And if you've been inside a major sponsor, you probably have seen an actual algorithm or rubric, right? That's not going to be something that's publicly available. And an IRB would tell you they frown upon that globally. The IRB 100% has the right to be, the buck stops here if they don't agree, if they think something is coercive in nature, but they don't have a playbook to operate from. And the other side of this coin, as they're considering and thinking about what makes sense, is not only is this not a standardized process across multiple IRBs, so you could have Johns Hopkins say something totally different than Mayo, which is totally different than Indiana University, even though they all have fantastic human research protection programs. And that's what Justin was alluding to earlier, right? Is that additionally, for those of you who may not be aware, there truly are individuals who game the system and make their living out of the compensation in clinical trials. They enroll in multiple clinical trials and they skew data. And so the IRB is very aware of this and very sensitive to it. And they're trying to balance coercion versus incentivizing, right? But not an easy feat. But what I will tell you is times are changing. COVID has been an eye-opener. And I think that what you will see is if you can make the case, if we can begin making the case not only that there is a data economy, right, and patients need to be dealt into it, and that needs to be one of the many metrics and variables they consider as they set compensation, right, but then take it a step further and champion some standardization, right? So that you don't have Mayo saying something different than Johns Hopkins, which is different than UCLA, right? Even though they're all great institutions. And that's going to cut down on that perception of disparity and have individuals like Sandra talk to these individual boards and inform based on the regions where they're located what makes sense for these individuals. So I've been rattling on. I'm going to shut up, but that's my contribution. This is Edie. I'm complete.
May I chime in? I'd like to clarify that in Tuskegee, the patients were told that they were being treated for their condition, which they kind of coupled with the term bad blood. I just want to clarify that part, that there was even though they may have received consent, it was under the guise of receipt of treatment, which they didn't receive.
Thank you, Leona, and I'm glad you pointed that out because that's 100% why that is not only a horrific tale of where we have failed our patients, but more importantly, it's where research compliance failed to think that just the idea of consent would be enough, would stop a bad actor from promising something that would never be delivered. And it's why you now see, if you live in nerd world with me, that when an IRB approves a consent form, there are multiple double-digit numbers of elements they must look for and ensure are present. And it very much came from the fact that those patients were told they would receive something they never did.
Amen.
This is Edie. I'm complete.
Amen to that, Edie. Yeah, these are some of the concerns that I have in the back of my mind as I brought up the wrench that I threw into this question. So thank you so much. Before we move on to Ben and the rest of the panelists, I did want to let Our audience members know that this is an open forum, and if you have something to add to the conversation, you can raise your hand and we will bring you up to the panel. So Ben, you are next. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I think Sherry is actually ahead of in the PTR.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries, no worries, Sophie. So yeah, I'm actually glad Edie brought the Tuskegee experiment up, but I wanted to, of course, concur with Michael and Christine and you, Sophie, on the points being made. I really think it's a value versus risk situation, and people need to be compensated, in regards to what are the risks being taken, how and the value. So of course I'm piggybacking on everything that has been shared thus far. I think we kind of all have a common consensus about how that needs to be constructed, and it's a matter of regulation and making sure that these studies are everyone is being transparent about what the study is and how the study will be used and how it affects the individuals. I really believe that we need to be completely transparent about that. And just because of the Tuskegee experiment, that was a lot of the reason minority groups did not want to take this COVID vaccine, of not being able to trust what the government is basically saying, what the vaccine has in it, and being open and transparent about it. So it works the same way with these clinical trials. Are we being open and honest about what exactly this is and what this means, and what the long term effects could be, and again, weighing that risk versus benefits on the individual level. With that, I'll go ahead and yield the mic to Ben.
Thank you, Sherry. It's been very interesting to hear what everybody has been contributing. I think the couple points that I want to share is picking up what Christine was talking about in terms of the song analogy and copyright analogy. I think sure data is not tangible, but it doesn't mean it's not valuable. In fact, in the modern technological world, modern world, I would even argue that intangible properties are even more valuable than pipettes or machines, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at the value of the top Fortune 500 companies, I think a decent percentage of the value really lies in the goodwill, which is intellectual property of these companies, more so than just the actual products, the ingredients, again, the physical cars, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we probably in this room, we all recognize that data is valuable. And in fact, I think what COVID really has taught us is it's even critical to have good data, solid, reliable data to drive the narrative of fighting the pandemic, and more so to come up with effective strategies, therapeutics, or diagnostics using valuable data. And I think technology could play a very important part in distilling the data that can be used to provide benefits to patients. So going back to the question of compensation for participating in clinical trial, I think we could probably consider more of a creative ways of really getting the patients to participate in the data by from a few perspectives, a few different angles. One is that I think it needs to be case by cases on the basis. Clinical trial, not all clinical trials are the same. There are trials that need lots and lots of data points, patients, but there could be other clinical trials that may be a rare disease clinical trials where fewer number of patients could be even more critical in generating the effective results from those trials. So I think based on the type of clinical trial, there should be a corresponding effective compensation scheme. Another perspective could be that instead of a lump sum payment, we could provide a combination of payment scheme, such as a small initial participation payment with future a back end payment for participation and completing trials, maybe even sort of a royalty type of consideration. If you consider, we are in a DeFi economy now with the various different schemes such as DAO, we could really utilize these modern conceptual approaches to get the right people participate in the clinical trials. When I say right, I mean scientifically. Data that could be utilized by clinicians to generate effective drugs or therapeutic treatment or devices. So I think it is really high time for us to consider a creative, effective approach to a compensation clinical trials with the final goal of generating effective methods, effective devices and drugs to really distribute and provide to the patients that are really in dire needs. So that's just my thoughts now. This is Ben. I'm done speaking.
Ben, this is Michael, and I I really appreciate your attempt to get to some practical applied approaches here, and would love to hear any feedback on those because it's a complex milieu of legal, regulatory, patients' rights, etc. I also would just want to note to everybody that throughout this, and one of the features of the Clinical Trials Clubhouse is the fact that we're pinning to the very top of this page a number of different resources that have been offered by various people in the audience, and hope that information will also be valuable to all of you, and you can download those from those pins. Sophie, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben, and everyone who've been providing your in PTR order. Am I correct?
Yeah, Sophie, I think you just dropped out just briefly there.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I just wanted to open up for Jaleesa. She's next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation today. I have a few perspectives based on like compensation and just overall the total cost of participating in a clinical trial. So if you think about breaking it down, if you get a lump sum, right, does that include your travel? Does that include your meals? Does that include hotel stays, airfare? Because depending on the type of trial that you're participating in, it's not just going to be stipend based. And a lot of times these things are paid for as an afterthought, and that's on the reimbursement side. But that also will negate people who say that they don't have the money up front to be able to fly to a different area to participate in a clinical trial, especially in cases of like rare diseases. So having a standardized process implemented where you just remove that burden right off the bat so that people are not participating in clinical trials because they can't afford to be there. And I think that's where a lot of the idea of incentivizing and coercion comes in, because you don't want people to participate just because, it's because they need money. But in reality is most people aren't doing that. Most people aren't participating in clinical trials because they need money. It's because they need the treatment. And a lot of times people are sacrificing, their savings and different things to be able to be a part of this life-saving and life-changing research. So I think for our part, just coming from a perspective of working for a company who focuses heavily on patient convenience, we have a global service that we pay, we make payments to patients via a prepaid debit card. And then we also have a concierge type service where we book the travel and, they have everything paid for directly so that it's not something that they have to be receiving a stipend, because in the United States, after a certain point, it becomes taxable. So if you're receiving all of that income and you're already, and it's looked at, I think beyond $600, is considered income. So now that becomes taxable. So at what points there's a lot more at play here than just, okay, yes, you should be compensated. But I also think that there should be a review of what's taxable, because if that's going to push someone to the next income level where they might be living paycheck to paycheck already, and now that's giving them a higher tax implication, there's just so many factors here. And I think if we're going to think about compensation, we have to think about compensation holistically and what can be done to offset the cost in the beginning of the study, and then have that be applied across the board. Because, like Sandra mentioned earlier, yes, in certain geographic areas, if you look at metropolitan areas, it is more expensive to run a study there than other places, but the data is still going to be the data. So there is that conversation as well, but there are changes, there are differences. And I think the first start to even think about this, and especially like with diversity, because diversity is not just skin deep. There's a lot of other things genetically, and depending on where you live, your body may adapt and metabolize medication differently than someone else who is in a different geographic area. That is all diversity. And if we are eliminating people just off of their financial and ability to be able to communicate to the commute to the site, that's going to cut out a lot of people to begin with. So I think that there's a lot that needs to be discussed about compensation, but I think a large part of that is removing that burden in the first place, and then we can see the true value of their data. And this is Jaleesa, and I yield.
Thank you so much, Jaleesa. That was such a great insight, especially the part about, getting to the threshold of taxable income. We hadn't broached that topic yet, and that's fair. We want to be able, of course, I think every sponsor, probably every CRO, most sites would like to make sure that every patient is able to get to their follow-up visits and compensated properly for their time and for their effort, and they're not struggling to reach there, because part of that is safety, right? Patient safety. If we're not following appropriately per protocol or on time, we may miss adverse events and other issues that come up during the life of the trial. So that's paramount. I wonder if that can be a solution toward can be part of the solution, right? Towards limiting the worry about bias by providing the service instead of only a stipend, so that the patient, one, doesn't have to worry about taxable income, and the sponsor, the IRB, has less worry about bias, because it's not cash. It's actually a service, right? So with that, I'd love to pass the mic to Taya to hear her thoughts. Thank you, Taya, for waiting so patiently.
Thank you, Sophie. I agree with many of the points that have already been shared. Usually, when I come in, it's more from the pharmaceutical company to the CRO level. So I'm looking more under the Sunshine Act and what we're providing. So Sunshine Act is where we cannot make any kind of deal or provide any kind of benefit outside of a normal contract negotiation. So some of the things covered under that would even be like promotional pins or any kind of promotional item, and it can get tricky, but from the patient side, what I would suggest is, if you haven't participated in a phase 1 trial, which is a healthy adult trial, to definitely consider participating. I have done a vaccine trial. It was, I don't know, I think about 5 years ago. It was very eye-opening. It was during bird flu, so it was a bird flu vaccine trial. It's eye-opening because you see the phase 1, what the nurses and staff are going through, the paperwork involved. You get to see your informed consent in real life, in action. So I think for us as researchers, it's important to have that perspective of the patient. And really, where I see the majority of the issues are really within that phase 1, because you are dealing with healthy adults. So you're trying to bring interest. Why would they want to do this study? And for some people, even just having a bed to sleep at night might, be enough to coerce them into the study. So every person is different on what is going to coerce them to join, and it's a fine line. So, but thank you for for having me, and I yield the mic. Thank you.
Thanks, Taya. I always appreciate having your diverse perspective also. The more diverse, the richer our learning. So with that, I want to pass the mic to Alminia. I'm sure you have so many thoughts after hearing all these perspectives. Let's have it.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah, I have an awful lot of thoughts, and I have to go back to a lot of the things that Jaleesa was saying because I thought she was spot on. We really need to look at each person individually and see. So there's a compensation for me, and there's an assistance, right? And to see how we can prepare both. So the data would be the data across the board, but for the different people, different assistance. And I think another really good point that she brought up was about the taxes because the other thing that we see with patients who get close to the $600 mark is that patients with, let's say, uncertain documentation status do not want to participate. They do not want to take part because they're afraid that that's going to trigger, you know, you know, opening to the government to check in on, their status. And so we have to think about all of the things and the reasons why patients don't participate and see how we can um, clear those barriers for the patient in such a way that we are not putting them in a different position. One of the things I talk about a lot is that, sometimes we think of patients as ourselves and think that they have, and can do a lot of the things that we can do, and certain small things like mobility, of finding the site, even parking, not necessarily just the cost of parking, but parking and then getting into the site, if you're talking about in a hospital, like all of these things, we have to kind of step back and see what does it take for our patients to do this, and can we compensate them or at least alleviate these sort of things so that they don't have to deal with them. So, I won't go on, but I really think that's the thing that we really need to really think about is how do we separate it? There's compensation for your data. There is assistance for being a part of the study, but there may be other assistance that we may want to be mindful of as well. I'm Armenian. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Alminia. Such a great perspective, I think. So tailored approach, depending on the patient, depending on the background, depending on the complexity and the type of study, right? I think one thing we can do is consider this at the outset of the study, bringing in different types of patients to advise on, how we can support them throughout the life of the trial. And one of those ways is financially, right, with support to make sure that they can attend all of the visits and they are not overburdened, so that we are getting a broader swath of patient population. I think that's super important. I saw that Michael, you unmiked for a moment. So I'm going to pass the mic to you, and then I think we have Douglas who hasn't spoken yet. So go ahead.
Well, in point of fact, Sophie, thank you. I wanted to make sure that we got to Douglas because Doug, I specifically asked him to come join us here because, Doug, if I recall correctly, you are a site owner, and recognizing some of the comments that came in from Jackie Blem about the burden that lands on top of the sites is really one of the key decision-making areas that exists for compensation and or reimbursement. So, Doug, I'd love to hear what you have to say, and welcome to Clubhouse. I see the little party hat there indicating that you're fairly new to this, so we're here to help you along. Doug,
Are
can
you
you
able
unmute?
to? Oh no, we
Oh,
lost him.
we lost
Push
him.
the
Oh,
wrong button.
no. Doug, are you there?
Doug accidentally made it back to
Well,
the audience, so
Oh,
we'll see if we can
He's
here
get
he
him
is.
back.
back.
here
He's
we
Okay.
come.
back.
Here he
Here.
is. Doug, we didn't want to lose you. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me, Michael. I guess just to set the record straight, I'm not an owner of a clinical site. I'm a consulting biostatistician who's been in the industry for over 30 years. So I'm very interested in data and how the choice of patient population influences the inferences that are drawn from the data that are collected. And that I guess the question that I was going to ask has been addressed in some part by Jaleesa and Almina since when I raised my hand. But I guess to further the point, from my perspective, that uh, all indications are not equal in terms of the patient population. And even within a certain indication, there's heterogeneity within the patient population. So a compensation amount, which may not seem as coercive to a given individual who is fairly economically stable, may indeed, that same amount may be coercive to somebody on the fringes. And I speak not just in the theoretical as a statistician, but as a cancer survivor and former cancer patient. My wife was laid off from her job 1 month before my cancer surgery. And, if I had been presented with the prospect of being compensated for enrolling in a cancer clinical trial during my cancer treatment, I cannot say that that would have not been coercive because I was looking at not only a loss of my income, but a loss of my wife's income for a protracted period of time. So I think we need to recognize that not all diseases have the same uh, patient population in terms of their economic stability, and even within the same indication, uh, the same amount of compensation may not be coercive to uh, individuals at the upper end of the income level, but may in fact be coercive at the lower end.
Doug, thank you very, very much, and my apologies for describing your background, but your comments are really spot on because they absolutely illuminate a situation in which concerns about coercion or the potential for it need to be very much so front and center. Thanks again for participating. We hope you'll come back each month. Sophie, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Elizabeth, and she's just come on board here onto the panel. Elizabeth, if you can unmic, we'd love to have your contributions here. And maybe before we do that, just a brief note about what your role is and how you come connected to Clinical Trials Clubhouse.
Thanks so much, Michael. And first, let me say thank you. It's been a really great conversation. I've learned things, and I always appreciate dialogue where that happens. So thank you to the panel. By way of background, I am Elizabeth Dreiser. I'm one of the co-founders here at Consuli, and also just a lifelong interested party on how we make a better world ultimately. And one of the areas is definitely figuring out ways to do right by each other in a modern way. As we are learning more, we can do more. A couple comments that I just wanted to riff off of and just throw into the field. Really, this issue of first principles. I kind of separate first principles from the mechanisms for how we achieve those principles. And I know that this has been talked and touched on by many who've thought about this and studied for a long time. And it really does come down to a first principles value in my mind is fair value. And that fair value can include, whether it's compensation, reimbursement, and, when you think about value, that issue of intangible or royalty, just, sort of those are mechanisms in my mind. I also wanted to really give a nod and, something that the Greenfire, I think she's still here. Sorry. Oh, Jaleesa, I really appreciated your comments about, the sensitivity of thinking about whether we tip people into, some unintended, negative consequence in terms of their income, particularly people who are disabled. And, because there's the coercive aspect, but there's also the other side, which is, you don't want to inadvertently do something that is harmful. And actually, it occurs to me in the category of mechanisms that an organization like Greenfire can be thoughtful about, earnings and payment. We are a cash-based tax structure, right? As individuals, we're not taxed on things that we do not actually get paid for. So one thing that could be something to think about in the mechanisms areas is, properly managing earning and payment timelines to be helpful to different groups, particularly when they're at that tipping threshold paradigm. Again, a mechanism I think is sort of a tangential to the primary conversation, which I really appreciate has been centered on first principles, which is this sort of fair value, and how do we do discovery or price that discovery of fair value. I just wanted to raise those issues. And then the final thing is just on this coercion dialogue. I've thought a lot about this, just thinking through my own, personal journey and healthcare, and also illnesses myself and my family. And, I think illness has its own sort of coercive cousin, if you will, right? Separate from money, when somebody's desperate because they're ill, they participate in ways that one would maybe say has coercive characteristics. And so I think that this is I appreciate the last commenter on this topic. Yes, it has, there's an economic dynamic to it for sure, and there is just a general, when you're desperate, you do desperate things, right? As humans, we do that. And you could be perfectly consented, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. I'll pause there, but I just thought I'd throw in a few other pieces, and really just a big thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Go ahead, Sophie. The floor is yours.
No, I was just going to say thank you for joining us. We didn't get to see you in the beginning. I'm so glad you were able to come join us and round that out for us, because that was a really good perspective, and I really appreciated it. Go ahead, Michael.
I think at this point, we're a little bit over an hour into this. Julie, do you want to just try and reset the room, and then I think we'll do a round robin here just to see if anybody's got final comments that they want to add, because it's pretty apparent that this topic is large enough that next month's conversation needs to be some sort of an iteration. And I guess I'll just ask at this time, among the panelists here, can you flash your microphone if you think we need to expand and extend this particular conversation? It's looking like the majority of you folks would like to do that. Just as a moderator's note here, if any of you have any particular focus to that, please send me an email afterwards, or contact Julie Schmid directly, and we'll do that. Yeah, I think since we are close to the end of the time that we normally set aside for this, let's go ahead and just make a quick go round, if we can, of the panelists, and let's start from the bottom up. Any final comments about the topic that we've and the one burning question that we've raised today? Are there some things that we've missed, and some things that you want to reemphasize? Can we start with Almenia?
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you for inviting me to this panel, because it's a very interesting topic and a very important topic. I think that we could probably talk about this a lot longer, and maybe even come up with some solutions, some best practices for moving forward. Other than that, I just, again, want to welcome what Douglas said about, it's not a one size fits all when we were talking about compensation and patients. And, if we could look at going into a model that really recognizes that, I think that would be a good direction for our industry. Thank you, and I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Great comments. Appreciate that. Taya?
Yes, I think a lot of really great points have been brought up, and we're in a capitalist society, so people need to be compensated for their time and not be considered being coerced, but be reimbursed reasonably for their time and efforts. And I really loved what Jaleesa had to say about the transportation and how that restricts patients. It's very important to consider that when setting up the clinical trials. And I will pass it to Jaleesa. Thank you.
Thank you, Taya.
And
And it's obvious that your bird is also tweeting these comments out.
Sorry about that.
We love it. We love it. We're
It's
just
lovely.
teasing you.
It's lovely. Yeah, it's
Jaleesa?
great.
well, I'm lacking any exciting background noise, but I truly hold like that's a true passion of mine, and especially working with a company like Greenfire, and that's something that we truly believe in. So it's really easy um, to talk about those issues because we can see that that can have a major impact. And I think that that's just the first step because if you're looking at diversity in clinical trials and just from a gene level, like it's not just always black and white. And this whole situation, and just the whole idea about compensation and reimbursement and coercion, there's so many levels and factors. And if we can at least just remove that one burden from the patient, and then we'll be able to look at all the other ideas and all of the other resources that we could have available. But I don't think that you should not be able to not participate in the clinical trial just solely because you don't have the finances to be able to do so. And I think looking at compensation holistically and how much it might cost per month to travel and have different expenses, and then having multiple children in a sense of like pediatric studies, like those, there's a lot of areas in compensation. I won't go on long with it, but there are some solutions out there, but I think we all have to be open and mindful of that. And this is Jaleesa, and I am complete.
Thank you, Jaleesa. Ben?
First of all, I think while I was hearing Tia's sharing, that was the first time I'm hearing a live tweet on Clubhouse. Sorry about the joke. I think a lot of points, very good points have been made. Just to echo what Douglas was talking about, I think my focus on clinical trial and competition would be, first of all, is data integrity. Again, as I said before, it's case by case basis, depending on what the drug or device you're testing and what type of patient population you need to have, whether it's gender or race or any other biomarker related. So I think that should be the first order of business for conducting clinical trial. As far as compensation, again, it really needs to be based on the type of trials you're conducting. Consider creative approaches, whether it's lump sum payment or whether it's a certain sense of future royalty or participation in the back end. So in other words, what we want to have is solid data coming from the clinical trials for the benefit of the drug producer or manufacturer or developer. At the same time, attracting sufficient number of patients with the right diversity and composition of the patients, so that we can get a great outcome with the right participation of the patients. This is Ben. I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Ben. You might already know, but the Consuli suite of clubhouses also includes a clubhouse on data dignity that you might want to participate in, and we can get that information to you as well. Sheree?
Yes, thank you. Very enlightening conversation. I've actually learned some things today. I want to double down on the transparency. We have to remain transparent in the clinical trials and everything that it involves, just to make sure we're getting these participants that are well educated on the subject and know exactly what they're signing up for. I can't stress that enough. There's so many patients that does not have the information needed, and they go into these things thinking they have the information, and later on find out that there's something about it they didn't know. So I just kind of want to double down on, from the transparency aspect of it, making sure whoever is running the clinical trial, that they're being completely transparent on what the trial involves in totality. Totality. With that, I'll yield the mic.
Okay, and Edie, some brief comments from you as well.
Yeah, so this has been a really interesting conversation, and like Sheree, I've also, learned some things and have some takeaways. I think, for starters, every IRB member should participate in a phase 1 clinical trial themselves, although I will give a lot of credence to the fact that a lot of them are providers who are very in touch with their patient pools. What I'm curious to hear more about, and I hope we can, launch more into it, presuming there is another session, which I'd love to see, is the practicality. Anyone who's met me for more than 5 seconds knows I'm the person who comes in the room, you throw all the spaghetti against the wall, and I figure out what sticks and how to make it stick. And so what I'm thinking of as I'm hearing all these ideas and different ways to approach the issue is, how do we take all these great ideas and put them in a meaningful format that starts the conversation at the IRB level or at the regulatory agency level of, we want to see a shift. What you have long considered fair market value up against coercion in the terms of compensation is changing, just as society changes in real time. And we want to see you, regulatory agencies, IRB, et cetera, reflect and uphold that in how you allow studies to actually be approved and conducted. And so I just would be really curious to hear some of these pull down to practical threads as we continue this conversation. Thank you so much. This is Edie. I yield.
Edie, thank you very much for that spaghetti. We like it. Leona.
Hi, Michael. Hello, everyone. Yes, I want to reiterate what Edie just talked about regarding a shift. I think a true paradigm shift is needed within all of our different sectors. So I know I sit in mostly the bulk of my career in biotech has been on the data management side, and I can see where I can get transactional within understanding how to pull data and how often it's utilized, not meaning systems wise. So from a systems perspective, when I think about use of clinical data and think about the different types of trials and their different phases, studies, whether it's study startup, study conduct, whether it's archiving, whether it's real world evidence, whether it's research use just for, whether it's scientists just kind of understanding what's happening within a certain population. There are different mechanisms that can be deployed within systems, but it would have to be something on a larger level that tunes pharmaceutical and biotech companies to that. So I see this being a industry-wide paradigm shift and related to policy, IRBs, regulatory agencies, as others have said. So, and I didn't flash my mic initially because I couldn't get to my phone, but I do think further conversations are needed. This is Leona, and I'm done speaking. Also, thank you for the opportunity. Now I'm done speaking.
I guess if we're going in order, it's my turn. So first, I want to say that we need each other. Patients need industry, and industry needs patients. And so we need to find a way to really work together. One of the things I would say is that we need to start our conversations with legislation around digital rights before we start anything. We have, I go into a clinical trial. I don't have any control of my data at that point. There was no conversation beforehand. It's already set. So we need to start those conversations. And we also need to start educating patient communities around the value of their collective data and give them that agency to negotiate for what they need for their own better quality of life. So I'll end there. I'm Christine, and that's my perspective.
Thank you, Christine. I always appreciate your perspective amongst the crowd. I think I really like what I'm hearing in terms of, what Edie said, the practical approach, gelling everything together, as well as what the conversation that Jaleesa started about practical, about, reaching thresholds with patients and making sure that we are giving them a fighting chance to be involved in a clinical trial and taking away some of those burdens and obstacles. And we don't know all of the situations that patients are in. Everyone is different. Every geography is different. Like Jaleesa said, every ethnicity is different, and every community is different. So I think what I took away so far is it has to be a more focused or tailored approach. And I wonder if that can happen not only at the IRB or regulatory level to create a standard, but also in order to tailor it. I think I've mentioned before in past Consuli Clubhouse rooms that we can have patient focus groups at the time of protocol design to advise as to, how data is collected, how often the visits are timed so that it's practical and approachable for patients. But what about including them in making those decisions about compensation? How much is beneficial and according to the patient's rights, and how much is going to cross over that threshold, which is sometimes difficult to see exactly where that threshold lies. So I think that's where we are, and I definitely feel like we have more than enough material to take us into another room, iterative from this topic. So with that, I want to pass it on to Lyona and Christine and Sandra, who's next, and then hopefully we can wrap up our room. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Yes, thank you so much, Sophie. And once again, I really truly enjoyed spending time this afternoon speaking with each one in this audience and all the panelists. I would like to say this. We all should be commended because we're healthcare heroes. We're talking about making things better for the patients so that they understand what it is that's going on and they are more comfortable within the healthcare realm and they know their worth within the healthcare realm. But we're doing all of this talking and we're not including the patients. We're talking at the patients, but we're not talking to the patients to ask them what are their thoughts on the clinical trials. What do they think? What do they know? How would they like to be compensated? These are all questions that actually, and I'm with Christine, that actually the patient can answer. And the patient should be asked those questions. And so if you're if you're running a firm that's in charge of clinical trials and you want to get the patient's responses, start working with some independent patient advocates that are out will be willing to host rooms or talk to the patients to see what's on their mind, because at some point in time all of the talking that we're doing, which once again should be commended, if the patient's voice is left out, you're going to keep getting skewed reports. You're not going to be collecting correct data because the patients don't understand what's going on. So please, everyone here, consider including the patient's voice now versus later. This is Sandra, and on to you, Michael.
Thank you, Sandra. And obviously, your voice, along with many patients who are actually on this call, definitely needs to be heard, and we will definitely do that. Justin, we're coming to the end here, and I'll ask you to kind of give us the last word, and then we'll close out because everybody has been so great hanging in here for over an hour and a half. Thank you. Justin.
Yeah, it's tough to have the last word in such a kind of sprawling conversation, but I'm glad to see that everybody's kind of the agreement that there's so much more to discuss here, and I look forward to those future discussions. I do just want to go back to something. I'm glad that later in the conversation, the concept of reimbursement for things like travel costs, lodging, for participants in any sort of study, a more classic clinical trial. That's something that we're much more familiar with and accustomed to doing in clinical research. And I think it's a good analogy for what we're looking, as data becomes more so the currency and the product here. It's a good analogy and a good way for us to kind of wrap our heads around it. If I'm saying I'm compensating you for your time and your effort in the trial, effort is a kind of nebulous word, and I could absolutely, we can wrap in, what is the value of what you're giving me? What is the value of the data you're giving me? But I think the majority of the work is going to be on us coming to a consensus of what is the value of that data, and that's, as everybody in this room knows, that's going to be a huge lift. But even if we are to ever get to that point, I think Sophie kind of alluded to this very early in the conversation. There still is the element of the patient needing to understand the value of their data. Otherwise, you're still in that place where they're not tying what you're paying them to what they're giving. It's more so a payment for they don't know what. And if you don't know what the price of gas is, I can tell you any number for what I'm going to pay you to drive to my site, and it doesn't tie to real world terms to you. So I think there's a lot of work for us to do, and obviously this is Consuli's bread and butter, and I commend you guys for it in not only defining what is the value of the data, but then educating the general public and these prospective participants in what that data is, because that'll just make them better consumers. And that's not just good for them, that's good for us as people that run studies, because we want, I can't in good ethical standing enroll you into my trial and pay you a certain amount for what the fair market value of your data is if you don't have an understanding of what that value is. So again, lots more to discuss here, but thanks for having me, and it's good to see everyone again. Justin, I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Justin. Great comments. And I think that as a part and parcel of what you were talking about is recognizing that, as we in common practice now are reimbursing for clinical trial involvement, the reality is there is a huge proportion of the trial population that can't even afford the cost to do the basics to get to the trial, to be involved in the trial. So it's not really a matter of reimbursing, it's actually a matter of trying to value and compensate for what they would have to spend to do that alone, not even starting to consider their data. So with that, I definitely can see that we need a permutation of this same conversation for next month, but something that we will be happy to shape over the next few weeks. But we want to keep this going. This has been a really wonderful collection of contributors, and I think we're all finding that this Clubhouse experience has been really energizing. We learned so much from one another. So in closing, gratitude to my co-moderators and to the panelists, and certainly to the audience who have joined this. So back to Julie, our host, and thank you again for joining Clinical Trials Clubhouse, and we will look forward to talking with you next month.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for a really outstanding room today. Definitely a lot to take away. Thanks to everybody who contributed to the chat. A lot of those links were pinned to the top of the room. If you missed it, you can always go back and check the replay. You can fast forward to skip and catch all of those. Be sure to also share the replay with anyone that you think might be interested and invite them to our next room as we continue this conversation, which is really, really great. In closing, again, I'm Julie Schmidt, Project Manager at Consuli, host for Consuli Conversations. Be sure to follow me, all our moderators, panelists, co-hosts here today. Check out the profiles of everyone. Check out the profile of our Clubhouse room. You'll see our other rooms in there as well. We host a long COVID as well as a data dignity Clubhouse room. Find us on social media. Give us a follow. We're at Consuli_Inc. On most platforms. You can find all that information in my bio as well. For any direct questions, comments, feedback, you can contact me directly. My email is in my bio. I love hearing from you guys. Also, be sure to check out our public virtual whiteboard. I've pinned it to the top of the room right now, where we welcome you to peruse highlights from past rooms and add any comments if you find yourself inspired. Again, for those that joined during our event or after our opening announcements and don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. With experts suggesting our individual data is worth $20,000 per year, we do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent and assemble their data, health records, labs, prescriptions, wearables, quality of life surveys, etc. And importantly, members receive smart matched individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. If anybody would like to be part of the data dignity movement and have us as your data agent and or participate in clinical trials, you can sign up to be matched to a study at consuli.net. That's consuli.net. There's no cost for anyone to join our movement. You can learn more about us at consuli.net, consuli.net. Again, all that information is in my bio, as well as our Consuli Clubhouse, Consuli Conversations Clubhouse room. You can check all that out. And again, send me any questions through the back channel or through email. Very much looking forward to our next Clubhouse discussion next month. Thank you again for everyone for participating. Until next time.